I'm 19 years old and I'm currently on a gap year. 2 years ago, I went on my first ever solo travel trip to Australia, Malaysia and Singapore. In the last video, I talked about what I got up to on that trip, where I went, how long I was there for, and in this video, I'm going to talk about what I learned through that experience. I encountered a few challenges on the trip, which I was able to get over and I've since learnt from. And that's why I've decided today that I'm going to share with you my top tips for travelling solo. My first tip is to talk to people. Whether it's asking people in the hostel what they're thinking of doing, or if they're thinking of doing the same things as you, maybe you could join up and go together, or it might be asking a local person what the best thing to do in the city is. It will really help you to make sure that you get the best out of your experience, particularly if you've only got a few days in a place. One of the hardest things as a solo traveller is to get photos, because often we're too nervous to ask other people if they'll take a photo of you at the top of an attraction or something. And I remember being stuck on the top of the Marina Bay Sands observation deck thinking I really want to get a nice photo up here, but I'm just too scared to talk to anyone. When I overcame the fear, I met this lovely Malaysian lady who took a photo of me, and to this day it's still one of my favourite photos. My second tip is to tackle things one thing at a time. When I was on my first flight, I couldn't see how I was going to get through the next 2 weeks without encountering a problem. And that was a key source of worry for me. The fact that if I had a problem, I wouldn't be able to just turn to my parents and ask them to help me with it. I'd have to deal with it myself. The thing that really helped me at that point was breaking down what I had to do into smaller steps. When I was on the plane, I literally couldn't see how I was going to successfully get from the airport to my hostel, which in hindsight is such a stupid worry because it's the simplest thing ever. So I started to write down on my notes app on my phone what I was going to do. I was going to get off the flight, I was going to connect to the airport Wi-Fi, tell my parents back at home that I was absolutely fine, go through immigration, collect my bag, and then just get on the subway straight to the stop that I needed, which was Chinatown in Singapore. It literally could not have been more simple, but yet because I was thinking about the whole trip and not just what I had to do that day, it became a really daunting prospect, and that's why I became so nervous. When I started to think about the trip day by day as opposed to the trip as a whole, it really helped me to enjoy the trip a bit more because I wasn't stressing out about what was to happen in the future. But instead I was just focusing on where I was in the moment, and I was able to enjoy it a lot more. My third thing that I want to say is that jet lag is an absolute beast. You need to make sure that you allow yourself time at the start of your trip, particularly if you're travelling to the other side of the world, to rest and recuperate, because honestly I just tried to keep going full steam ahead and it left me feeling absolutely exhausted by the time I got to Australia. What I've done since, and my advice for myself, would have been to make sure that I tried to adjust before I go. If that means going to bed a couple of hours earlier or a couple of hours later, it's really going to help you when you get to your destination, and I really wish that I had done that on my first trip. My fourth tip would be to be really wise about what you're going to do or where you're going to go. So I booked my location, so I went to Singapore and then to Australia and then to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur. That was definitely the right way around for me to do it. Whilst on the transport networks and just wandering around the city, I felt very safe in Singapore. In Malaysia, there were a couple of areas where I just didn't feel quite so safe, and a lot of the information wasn't necessarily in English, and that obviously removed the sense of familiarity for me just a little bit. I still had an amazing time, but I needed to have had that time in Singapore to adjust to travelling on my own, particularly at such a young age, in order to be able to enjoy Malaysia as much as I did. I love getting to meet other people when you're solo travelling because that's really how you enjoy it. You enjoy experiences with other people. So as much as I wanted to do the boat trip or the bus tour, that wasn't going to be where other travellers were because they're just so expensive. That's why I opted for the free walking tours in Singapore, because I was able to meet my friends Manu and Tony, and also it was a reasonable price, so it helped to keep my costs down, particularly because I did have a budget for this trip, which I'll talk about later. And my fifth tip is just to go for it. It was definitely one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had in my life. Even though I wasn't a shy person at first, travelling to the other side of the world when you're only 17 pushes even the most confident of teenagers out of their comfort zone. Now, you may be wondering how I managed to afford all of this and how much it all cost. I'd been saving up money from birthdays and Christmases for many years prior to this trip, and the month after I came back from my trip was actually my 18th birthday. And so many of our friends and family gave me money towards my 18th birthday in advance so that I was able to afford the trip. As I go through the costs and prices of everything, I'm going to try and put them on the screen here. That's why I have this strange whiteboard next to me. My flights were £723. Unfortunately, I don't know the exact breakdown of these, but this included a flight from Heathrow to Singapore, then Singapore to Perth, Perth to Kuala Lumpur, and then Kuala Lumpur back to the UK. Starting off with Singapore, my airport transfers cost $5.40, and in British pounds that translates to £3.08. My transport in and around Singapore cost $8.10, and that in British currency is about £4.62. Whilst I was in Singapore, I used the standard ticket because it just wasn't worth it for me whilst I was only there for such a short time to use either the tourist pass or the EZ card. With the standard tickets, the way it works is that each time you want to travel, you just top up your card up to 6 travel journeys. So with the first one, you have to pay a 10-cent deposit, and then with your third journey, you get that deposit back, and on your 6th journey, you actually get a 10-cent discount off of the price of the ticket. Whilst I was in Singapore, I stayed at the Wink Capsule Hostel. The hostel is located in Chinatown, and at the time it cost £14 per night. I had a look today and it's since actually been renovated, and as such the prices have also gone up. So I think it costs around £19 per night now. Whilst in both hostels in Singapore and Malaysia, I stayed in all-female dorms. I would say with the hostels, it's fine if you want to go for an all-female dorm, that's just totally down to your preferences. But the bigger the room, the better in terms of meeting people. It just gives you more chance to meet people who are like you or doing the similar sort of thing to you, and therefore you'll be able to make more friends if you're in a bigger room. Although I'm not including food in this budgeting video, I'm going to tell you the cost of a typical meal in each of the locations. The cost of a typical meal and a drink, a fruit juice or something similar in a hawker centre, I found was about 6 Singapore dollars, and that works out at about £3.50. I also used to eat out once a day in order to reduce the amount of expense that I had, and then I would cook in the hostel the rest of the time. It's really important when booking hostels, particularly if you want to keep costs low, that they have kitchens because you'll be able to cook for a lot cheaper. In terms of the attractions I went to Gardens by the Bay, the Botanical Gardens, and they were both free. Then with the Marina Bay Sands observation deck, that cost about £13.10 in British pounds or 23 Singapore dollars. Although I said I went on free walking tours, there is a slight expectation that you give a tip at the end depending on how much you think the tour is worth, and also how much you've got to spend given your budget. I adjusted the amount of tip that I gave to each of the different tour guides depending on how good I thought the tours were. So I went on 4 tours total, and overall I gave tips of 25 Singapore dollars, and that works out about £15. For 4 tours that lasted probably in total about 12 or so hours, I thought that was a really reasonable price. Moving on to Australia. Because I stayed with a friend in Australia, I didn't have to pay for airport transfers, accommodation, or most of my food. Thanks Alice for that one. And so this won't be necessarily representative of if you're travelling properly around Australia. The cost of a typical meal in a restaurant plus a drink in Australia is about $20 to $22, and that works out about £10 to £12. When I went to Fremantle Prison, I went on all 3 tours of the prison. There's an offer if you go on all 3, and so in total that ended up costing me 39 Australian dollars. That works out to be about £20.55. In total, my trains to Perth and then to Fremantle cost about 22 Australian dollars. In British pounds, that's about 11 or 12 pounds. I did go on a walking tour in Perth, but that was provided by the Tourist Information Centre, and therefore there was no kind of tipping at the end or anything, and it was completely free. Then back to Kuala Lumpur. In Kuala Lumpur, I paid £3.72 for my airport transfers, and that is about 20 RM. For my airport transfers, I used the Clear Express train, and I think that only took half an hour to get into the city, so that was really quite a good price for that. A lot of the prices in Malaysia were significantly cheaper than Singapore, and that's true of the accommodation I stayed in. So I stayed in the Space Hostel in Chinatown, and that worked out about £6 per night. The cost of a typical meal in Kuala Lumpur, if you were eating something like chicken rice, was about 8 RM, and that works out at about £1.50. In terms of attractions in Kuala Lumpur, the Batu Caves, the KLCC Park and the Eco Park are completely free, although you will need to pay for the train to get from the city centre to the Batu Caves because they're not actually in Kuala Lumpur city centre. However, if you want to do the Dark Caves tour whilst you're at the Batu Caves, that will cost you about 35 RM, and in British pounds that's about £6.50. The cost of the train from central Kuala Lumpur to the Batu Caves is about 5 RM, and in British pounds that works out to be about £1, and that is the return journey. Then, as I said in the previous video, we went to see Mamma Mia at the cinema, and that set us back about £4. So in total, my trip ended up costing me £873.89. I think this is really reasonably priced, particularly because I went away for 2 weeks, although obviously in Australia my costs were kept low by the fact that I was able to stay with Alice and her family, and that was really lovely of them to host me. This was kind of a holiday for me, as well as being obviously like my first experience of solo traveling, and so that's why it's kind of budget, but also there are some things that I definitely could have scrapped if I wanted to keep costs lower. I hope that you found this video useful, and if you're thinking of going off to travel in Southeast Asia or Australia anytime soon, I hope this has given you some idea of the costs involved. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below so that you know when I'm adding new videos. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.